And then they sit, and the attendant makes the announcement. Before this gracious court now appear these prisoners to answer for the multiple and grievous savageries of this species. How plead you, criminal? And then Data says, if I may, Captain. Picard nods. And then Data stands up and he says, Objection, Your Honor. In the year 2036, the new United Nations declared that no Earth citizen could be made to answer for the crimes of his race or forebears. Q says, Objection denied. This is a court of the year 2079, by which time more rapid progress had caused all United Earth nonsense to be abolished. So what do you think? Should a citizen of Earth be expected to answer for the behavior of his or her race or his or her forebears? I mean, Q doesn't tell us what he thinks on the matter, but it seems that some humans, starting in around the year 2036, said no, that would be unjust. And then others became more advanced and declared that to be nonsense around 2079. Sounds like Data and the Federation are of the opinion that true progress, understood as moving toward the absolute, which is actually true, it seems like they believe that true progress would involve only judging people as individuals on what they personally have or haven't done. But it seems that the humans back in 2079 understood progress to mean the opposite, and that people are to be considered guilty for the things that, quote unquote, their people have done in the past. So I guess the intriguing philosophical question for us today would be, well, number one, what is the meaning of progress? Is it the direction in which things progress, i.e., the direction that we see things going, that's progress? Or is it moving in the direction of the absolute in such a way that things could go the wrong direction for decades or centuries? So, number one, what is the meaning of progress? Number two, are people responsible for only their own actions or also for the actions of those with whom they may be associated? It seems that much of Q's premise throughout this episode is that Picard and friends are to be tried for the crimes of humanity. But by the time we get to the end of the episode, Q seems more or less to be willing to exonerate Picard and friends, not because humanity hasn't done horrible things, but actually just because Picard isn't doing those kinds of things. So by the time we get to the end of the story, we come to realize that Q may not actually intend to hold Picard and friends responsible for those horrors of the late 21st century. I mean, Q is kind of difficult to read because he seems to want to psychologically blast Picard with humanity's past throughout the episode, constantly implying that Picard is the same as his ancestors. However, the moment Picard demonstrates that he's not, it seems that Q is satisfied and no longer holds Picard and the Enterprise responsible for actions that they didn't have any part of. So this may suggest that Q's mindset is kind of a combination, that his mindset perhaps involves people having some limited psychological responsibility in terms of needing to be conscious of and bear the psychological burden of the past, but not actually in the end to be held culpable for things they didn't do or for mindsets or attitudes that they've never personally had. Picard and friends, meanwhile, seem to hold a hard, fast distinction that they believe they cannot be held in any kind of association with those humans from the dark part of history. It seems that to Picard, the very mention of such humans even existing under the name humanity and implying any kind of association whatsoever between him and them, it seems to Picard is just an outrage, a travesty in his viewpoint, to be completely absurd. It seems that Picard's instinct in the section that's coming up is not to reason with Q about the measure or degree or nature of this association, but instead, with the reflex of a morally indignant Starfleet captain, it seems that Picard's reflex is just to be simply outraged by the very reminder that these people even existed, and that there could be any association of any kind whatsoever. Picard, who ordinarily has a great deal of tact and diplomatic nuance, in this discussion has a kind of a rigidity, perhaps partly due to his anger at Q, as well as his pride and his passion for the purity and excellence of the Federation and the humanity that he's so proud to be part of. Also, as a result of the anger that Q is stirring up by all the volatile things Q is doing. But I think part of it as well is that the truths that Q is highlighting actually are, for Picard, the kind of humiliating obscenities that to a Starfleet captain who lives for the gold of what he regards to be true humanity in the Starfleet way, these things are things that you don't draw attention to. You barely even want to admit that they were there as part of humanity. So in that sense, you could say, in a way, Q is hurling darts straight at the center of Picard's worldview, of Picard's value system, Picard's sense of identity and social belonging, and certainly at the core of Picard's heart. He's attacking Picard's truth. which is part of why Picard's response is not going to be to start parsing verbs and diplomatically negotiating bland philosophical nuances. No, Picard, as the gentle, dispassionate philosopher, is nowhere to be found in this scene. Picard is furious. Picard is willing to give no ground.